Stewart. She also has a joint appointment in the Department of Medicine and at the Center for AIDS Prevention Studies, where some of us are located, where Stewart and I are definitely located. And that is where we have the pleasure of really interacting and seeing Carol on a regular basis when we're not trapped at home. So Carol's research program crosses the disciplines of population studies, sociology, and behavioral sciences, and focuses on examining the impacts of population mobility on HIV prevention and care outcomes. She's a PI, she's a co-PI, she's a co-investigator, and she really contributes expertise in applying mixed methods approaches and behavioral and social theory within HIV intervention and implementation studies and randomized controlled trials in health systems and communities in sub-Saharan Africa. And if you took a look at her work, you would know that right away. So she's used qualitative research methods to design mHealth interventions in Kenya and Uganda, and has conducted research on structural and cultural aspects of health services utilization and other behaviors among people living with HIV. Thanks for talking with us today about theory construction in the context of public health research. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks. You know, if there were time, I would love to have everybody in the group go around and talk about their background, but I suppose that maybe we don't have time for that. What do you think, Kim? I mean, can you guys tell me, okay, let me just ask you, is everyone in this group, because I haven't been meeting with you all, is everyone very experienced in qualitative research methods with a lot of background? Thumbs up.
No, not that experienced.
Okay, a mixture, not super experienced to super experienced. And I see some faces and some names that I haven't seen in a really long time. I guess that what I'm going to do is just jump into this. I'll ask one other question, which is, could you raise your hand using the little reactions button if you actually had a chance to read that Timmermans and Tavory article? How many people might have had a chance to at least look at it? Okay, this does not assume that you've looked at it, so it's totally okay, and it's really, I forgive you all. Let me just start by, yeah, no worries. Let me just start by putting some slides up, and I want to just like invite you please to, you know, unmute and pop up, and if I don't see your hand, just like be assertive and speak. If you have any questions or want to stop me at any point as I'm talking, and I will stop periodically also and just like try to have some questions for discussion as a group. But I will just share my screen and try to give a little bit of background of what I was hoping to talk about with you guys today. Can you see this?
Yes, looks great.
Great. So I wanted to just highlight for you guys the references that I'm tapping for this session. The Timmermans and Tavory article was actually recommended to me by a reviewer of one of my manuscripts. This is one of those, like, I think you're actually doing this suggestion made to me as an author, which was fantastic because I found it super useful. And then I have two of the manuscripts that I hope to talk about. And then, you know, two of the textbooks that I refer to a lot are the Denzin and Lincoln Strategies of Qualitative Inquiry. You know, I think I have looked at different editions, and there are different flavors of different editions to that. So it's not like you have to have the third edition or something. And then, of course, Kathy Sharmaz's Constructing Grounded Theory is such an important one for me. So just as references. And let's see, I'm going to have to just take a minute and talk about the paradigm, what are called, you know, the paradigm wars in qualitative research. And, you know, this is of interest to me as somebody, you know, doing qualitative research in the context of a a medical school. I'm constantly trying to kind of test the boundaries of where I see myself sitting within the context of trying to do very applied work, and in the context of public health and medicine. So what the paradigms we're really have to do with are the politics and the evidence and the ethics of evidence, like what constitutes evidence in qualitative research. I'm trying to move this window around so I can see you guys while I also talk. What processes and practices are required to produce evidence? How do we define rigor? How do we evaluate rigor? What kinds of criteria for evaluating rigor are imposed on us, and do we agree with them? I don't know about you guys, but I confront this all the time in reviews of manuscripts, right? So we could spend an entire session just talking about that. And I'm also interested in, defining for myself, where do I see positivist strains in qualitative research, especially qualitative health research? Because sometimes it's not obvious when you're not kind of operating out of a kind of a positivist epistemology, then you're usually quite explicit about it. So, and when you are, you're not usually aware of it, it seems. So I would say, if we had to say, what are the positivist strains, it's almost like defined more by what isn't said than what is said. But it's, ways of approaching qualitative research that are very pragmatic and very kind of explicitly or implicitly aligned with the epistemology of quantitative research. The critiques of it, of course, are that it's atheoretical, that it obscures the role of the observer, that it's operating from this kind of what some people in philosophy would call a Cartesian framework of I'm an invisible observer in outer space, and somehow I'm not an embodied observer that is in the world that is being observed. And sometimes what I think of as a false rigor, where they're imposed kind of evaluations for rigor that are not appropriate for the method. And in my mind, these, positive strains in qualitative work are marked by what's not stated or undertaken or made transparent vis-a-vis the theory that's brought to the interpretive process, or processes that clearly involved examinations of counter evidence, deviant cases, ways in which themes that are emergent are also contradicted by counter evidence. So can I just stop for a moment and ask anybody to chime in here? I mean, where do you see sort of evidence for this in our world?
I would just say, agree with you 100%, Carol, that it comes through during, dealing with reviewers' comments. That could be comments on manuscripts or grant proposals. It comes up in the context of working in mixed methods interdisciplinary projects. And maybe we're talking about findings or results from one or another's piece of the research. Just trying to have to explain ourselves when we're working with new collaborators who don't understand that there is another way of thinking about evidence and data and research because they're so steeped in positivism. As you're suggesting, it's marked by what isn't stated or even just acknowledged or known. Those are the things that come to mind for me.
I'm battling this right now in a manuscript where I keep trying to put some kind of a positionality statement in, and it's a health sciences journal, and they don't understand why I think that's an important piece of my methods to discuss who I am in relationship to the people I'm interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching, when we're teaching on this campus, or possibly in Julia's context too.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, for me, the most recent example I'm thinking of is embarking on new mixed methods collaborations with new quantitative colleagues, and then just realizing there's just kind of where this would be and how that would coordinate the process, and yeah, just totally different assumptions.
Anybody clinical? I mean, have this very different orientation towards what counts as evidence. I mean, versus a more interpretive stance. Also, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think we battle it constantly. I feel also like sometimes I feel like the COREC guidelines, which were intended to be something that kind of enforces rigor in qualitative work, are so weird, and seem to have been generated out of some process where somebody was trying to be inclusive of kind of both paradigms, but it's an odd kind of Frankenstein monster of both in ways that are oddly restrictive. I don't know if anybody feels that's that way about it.
Very much so.
So today I'm talking about the interpretive tradition in qualitative research and what Timmermans and Tavory have to offer to this. And if I had to talk about, what, in a nutshell, what it is, it's like trying to do our best to make transparent our own positionality with respect to the research process as part of the world of the people studied. There are no objective observations. There's no such kind of, like, we can't cancel ourselves out of the process of our perceptions of the world. As like Merleau-Ponty so eloquently lays it all out in Phenomenology of Perception, we are, perception is intimate, and we are kind of, the process of observing is interactive. And even newer biomedical and earth scientists are kind of moving in the direction of understanding that knowledge is embodied, and that, like, even oceans participate with us in the measurement of their acidification. And there is a world that exists prior to us, but our perception of it is an interaction. There are only observations that are socially situated in the worlds of and between the observer and the observed. So, we have, Kathy Sharmaz's book on constructivist grounded theory, I think is great, and has been such an important resource for so many of us. And I'm sure that many of you guys are doing grounded theory. And how do we call it grounded? It's supposed to be observed in the data through inductive analyses, and we talk about the emergence of theoretical categories, inductive analysis is supposed to be, even in kind of much earlier and possibly more positivist ways of thinking about this, emerged through a process of constant comparisons between groups that are sampled on theoretical grounds. But I thought Kathy Sharmaz kind of brought the field forward and progressed from the original Glaser and Strauss conceptualizations of grounded theory through her emphasis on theory generation in the context of grounded theory, to oppose the notion that inductive coding is a process that's devoid of any a priori assumptions that are based on prior empirical research and theory. So she was, I thought, attempting to push against this strain that is kind of positivist within grounded theory, that supposes somehow that emergent themes appear on their own, that data speaks for itself, that somehow the interpreter is not engaged in the process of actually doing that work of identifying what is emergent and why. Grounded theory, advocates iterative cycles of theoretical sampling, data collection, and data analysis. It involves kind of a simultaneity in the research process, where you're doing close iterative analyses of data after cycles of sampling. You're interrogating your assumptions and concepts from prior theory. You're reviewing counter evidence and and deviant cases. And they're, and this is the field where, the phrase theoretical saturation is used, where you can say the data are saturated. We don't need to sample any more people in order to be able to adequately describe a phenomenon of interest. So I'm going to stop there and ask, for anybody in this group who's done grounded theory, does this make sense in terms of your understanding of it? And also, I don't know if you guys want to talk about this, but to me, grounded theory has always implied theoretical sampling. Do you guys agree? Because I think they were very critical of grounded theory in this article by Timmermans and Tavory, and I'm going to go into the critique of it in the next slide, but I just want to stop for a moment and ask, for people who are doing grounded theory, is this how you think of it?
Well, maybe we can just note who considers themselves to be a grounded theorist or have practiced grounded theory.
Anyone in this group?
I mean, I've done more constructivist or constructionist type grounded theory in some of my work, but I hadn't really thought of the theoretical sampling as always being applied. I mean, I think it also depends on sort of what the data are and kind of what the goals of the study sort of end up being in that sense. But I haven't, maybe you could say a little bit more about the implied theoretical sampling.
Well, I mean, I guess my understanding was that, I mean, we see the phrase like theoretical saturation thrown around a lot. And I just don't know how one can say data are saturated unless there's been a little bit of give and take around sampling and the size of a sample and the composition of a sample. And maybe I'm being too strict about it, but it seemed to me that the whole idea is that you are analyzing your data and you're saying, here are salient characteristics and kind of salient phenomena relative to our research questions, and the findings imply that we need to ask more questions of this type of person or collect more information about this particular phenomenon, and then you do more sampling. And then after the stories repeat themselves and you start to see such kind of similarities and narratives, the data are theoretically saturated and you can stop sampling. That's my understanding. But Chris, how have you been able to tell me what your conceptualization of, like, in the context of what you do, constructivist grounded theory, like where do you see the phrase theoretical saturation coming in?
I mean, I'd see it as an argumentative device in some ways, just because, I mean, given the practicality of an applied research environment, where sometimes it's not practical to actually go back and resample large numbers or sort of follow theoretical threads, rather because of the pressures of funding and sort of getting out products. It's kind of constructing the argument that there is a theoretical saturation in one dimension to justify this argument, and that the evidence that's presented is, quote, real or validated by members' categories in some way. So I think of it as more of an argumentative, device.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I mean, that's helpful. Does anyone have any questions so far, by the way?
I mean, I guess my question, Carol, for you is just to understand your positionality, and do you consider yourself a grounded theorist?
I not always. No, not always, because for me, I think to really use that word, I think I've had to design a little bit of flexibility around my sampling approaches and about the processes that I'm going to be using and how they're going to play out in terms of data collection and analysis. So if I know that I can actually set up a study where I can do kind of iterative data collection and analysis throughout, then I can probably claim that. And if I can do additional sampling as needed through the process, then I can claim that. But otherwise, I don't sort of necessarily use that term. Say if I know I'm going to only interview 20 women and I know I'm only going to do the analysis after the data collection is done, then I wouldn't call it grounded theory.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you.
So Timmermans and Tavory have this description of grounded theory and say that grounded theory has become a leading approach, promising the construction of novel theories. But they say, yet grounded theory-based theoretical intervention has been scarce, in part because of its commitment to let theories emerge inductively rather than imposing analytical frameworks a priori. We note, along with a long philosophical tradition, that induction does not logically lead to novel theoretical insights, despite what Kathy Sharma says it can lead to. There are problems with grounded theory, or at least in the way that it's applied. I mean, I guess they're making the point that everybody calls, well, I'll read it. Some researchers explain the lack of theoretical breakthroughs with the lackadaisical, incomplete, or inaccurate application of grounded theory principles. Grounded theory, they argue, has been used to label any research endeavor that involves coding, any form of qualitative data analysis, any kind of theory construction. Research that claims to be grounded often has very little to do with the original methodological precepts, using the label grounded theory as a shorthand for qualitative research and the lack of a well-articulated analytical strategy. Many others see grounded theory's focus on induction as the critical weakness, stymieing theory development. In the original book, and especially the continued work of Glaser, the hallmark of grounded theory has been letting new theory emerge from data without theoretical preconceptions. Thus, Vacon dismissed grounded theory as an epistemological fairy tale. Is this fair?
100%. I feel.
Okay. How so? Tell me.
Well, I mean, when I read this paragraph, I just, made lots of marginal notes that this is so well stated. And I think my critique of the use of grounded theory, certainly in, health research, is that they're derivatives. People are certainly relying on some of the, the techniques used in grounded theory and to facilitate qualitative data analysis, but it's, generally speaking, never a very, just authentic grounded theory process. So I love the sentence that the claims to be grounded often has very little to do with the original methodological precepts, using the label grounded theory as a shorthand for a lack of well-articulated analytic strategy. It's really because we don't necessarily have labels. And grounded theory is, I think, just overused. And I'm pretty sure we've talked about this in different qualitative working group sessions. I also, I struggle with papers that I'm reviewing, and even if there's more of an explanation of their modification of grounded theory, yet the findings don't actually present a theory, that has always been very confusing to me, because I wasn't trained in grounded theory and have only sort of done self-study of it and haven't been drawn to it because, for the reasons that Chris mentioned, it's just not very practical in our world. So I just confess to being confused when I see people labeling their work as grounded theory and then do not present a theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's as though basically people are saying that kind of close analysis of data, like inductive analysis, is grounded theory. And that inductive analysis also is not necessarily well informed by theory, or it's doing that it's engaging in the epistemological fairy tale of imagining that there are no preconceived notions going into the process of interpreting those data as you are developing a coding framework.
I just wanted
perpetuating the black box, Sorry, Katie.
No, okay. I think this is reflecting to me a broader lack of value for qualitative research in general, because what happens is in universities, there's not enough understanding that there are actually a diversity of methods to do qualitative research, at least in I was in public health, and it was like you could say you were doing grounded theory, but that didn't really make sense. But no one was teaching thematic analysis really in depth, or other kinds of analysis. And so it's sort of like, this is the only hammer we know to use. So say you're using that because there's not enough depth of understanding and teaching the methods, at least, sorry, in my in public health experience.
True.
I would totally agree with that. And I think it is then used as that shorthand. And I think in some ways it sort of devalues qualitative research overall, because you're basically slapping a theory label on something that doesn't make any sense. And I don't think we're fooling 100% of reviewers and funders. And I've seen this a lot. I've done more thematic analysis, never done any grounded theory, just read about it. But in my brief training on this, amidst all the other things that I'm doing for my job, which don't always align with anything, there's no other, I wasn't taught anything else. I don't know what else to read or what to call this, or how to have that shape my sort of structure around analysis and what I'm doing and how I'm describing what I'm doing. This is actually, this is really helpful to read this. It feels like I'm sort of being validated. And I will say that I have a lot of colleagues within UCSF Institute of Global Health Sciences, our malaria team, who want to be more involved in qualitative research and bringing in acceptability components to our work, and the types of approaches and surveillance for elimination we're trying to bring to countries as options. And everybody feels like they have to use the grounded theory sticker. And we need something better than that. I don't think we even know what we're talking about anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. It has become such a shorthand, and I'm such that I don't even know what people think why they are applying that label to what they do. It doesn't make sense to me.
Carol, I wonder if I could request that you share with us how you think about what theory means in this discussion, because obviously there's a huge, very few people are generating grounded theory, but a lot of people, grand theory, but I think a lot of people are generating kind of more middle range theories or even just conceptual models. And I wonder if kind of naming what we mean here can both help us better understand your take on it and, see if it kind of disentangles a little of Timmermans and Tavory's critique of Sharma's.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll say I'll say one or two things about that now, but I think like the next slide, a couple of slides in my examples will get into it more. I think you make a really important distinction between theory and conceptual models, which is always really helpful. I think theory, as in when I say theory, I talk about, all the things that we would be exposed to across multiple disciplines of social theory, behavioral theory, theories of health behavior, social theories, anthropological perspectives, or theory from organizational development, or theory from political science, or theory from behavioral economics. And when we're developing conceptual models, which we might do as a result of the engagement of the nexus between theory or theories and data, sometimes that process, that nexus then leads us to develop a conceptual model, which can draw upon multiple theories, but which, is a presentation of our conceptualization of this case, of this question. That's what I mean when I am talking about theory. But let's talk about it some more. And with the constructing theory definition, constructing theory from this article is, engaging in creative attempts to generalize mechanisms, particular cases, or links between causal statements in ways that provide better traction for understanding observations they work with, and possibly anticipate observations in other cases. Constructing theory is an ongoing pragmatic process of puzzling out and problem solving that draws on existing ways of understanding what the phenomenon is a case of, and asserting that unexpected theoretical formulations and categories emerge in relation to data. So let me dig right into what Timmermans and Tavory are proposing in this particular article. And I don't know whether you guys will find it helpful or not, but they have this concept of abduction, drawing from theory of inference, meaning, and action of pragmatist philosopher Charles Peirce. We argue that abduction rather than induction should be the guiding principle of empirically based theory construction. It refers to a creative inferential process aimed at producing new hypotheses and theories based on surprising research evidence. And we propose that abductive analysis arises from actors' social and intellectual positions, but can be further aided by careful methodological data analysis. And they outline how there are formal methodological steps that enrich abductive analysis through processes of revisiting, defamiliarization, and alternative casing. To be honest with you, as they describe what they are proposing, it's not, to me, in my mind, that different from some of what Kathy Sharma talks about, even though they're trying to make this clear distinction between what they are proposing and what she does. But to just, define our terms here, deductive reasoning begins with a rule, proceeds through a case to arrive at an observed result, which either demonstrates the rule or falsifies it. There are people who say they are doing content analysis, and sometimes they call it directed content analysis. Sometimes they call it deductive content analysis. And I think that means they have, they're starting a qualitative research project with a theoretical framework, maybe even a coding framework that they're then applying to the data. And then sometimes they say, but we're going to be aware of emergent themes beyond these categories, which in my mind is not deductive content analysis. So there's a lot of muddying of these kinds of terms, because to me, deductive reasoning is like, I have my blinders on. Don't even tell me about things that I'm not expecting to see. I want the answer yes and no to my hypotheses, and I'm going to ignore everything in the data that doesn't pertain to that answer, which is a little bit a little bit contradictory to the whole point of qualitative in a certain way, in my mind. But I'm a zealot. So induction, in contrast, starts with a collection of given cases and proceeds by examining their implied results to develop an inference. Reversal rule is operative and classified by grouping particulars in a preformed general category is the kind of formal definition. And abduction, they argue, starts with consequences and then constructs reasons. The form of reasoning through which we perceive the phenomenon is related to other observations, either in the sense that there's a cause and effect hidden from view, in the sense that the phenomenon is seen as similar to other phenomena already experienced and explained in other situations, or in the sense of creating new general descriptions. So in other words, where does this speak to prior theory? Where does this kind of seem to repeat what has been seen previously in prior empirical research? And what are the kind of limitations of what the data say to me with respect to either of those things? Like, where does it kind of, where are the applied expansions of the prior theory? And where are the kind of additions to the prior literature of what's been observed? And it's paying attention to those ways that the data themselves speak to the prior theory or the prior literature, which is why I felt this is so helpful. So I'm going to pose some questions now before I then get into examples from my work. And I'll read these quotes. So abductive analysis is a qualitative data analysis approach aimed at generating creative and novel theoretical insights through a dialectic of cultivated theoretical sensitivity and methodological heuristics. Abductive analysis emphasizes that rather than setting all preconceived theoretical ideas aside during the research project, researchers should enter the field with the deepest and broadest theoretical base possible and develop their theoretical repertoires throughout the research process. So, I mean, what does this imply to you all about how one might begin the design of a qualitative research study, or what would be required to do this kind of work in your mind?
I just ask for more help and understanding before we. So I'm kind of thinking how is abduction different from like an inductive, deductive, thematic, for example? Because I'm starting out in my career. I don't have the many years of experience that many of you have behind you. And I think I am starting to kind of rely on that as a crutch to describe how I do my work. But in my mind, it's about way seeing the to already being explicit about that and how you approach the data, but then also being open to, things that you weren't expecting, et cetera. So emergent, right? So can you, help me understand?
I mean, I think that when they describe what they mean about the process, I think they even use that kind of language, Julia, where they're like, you're doing inductive, you start with kind of a set of things that you're expecting to see on the basis of prior, theory and literature. So you have a kind of an implicit, theoretical basis, and then you're examining the data in light of those things, and you're being very alert to the surprising things. And so you're in essence, you are doing this kind of iterative, deductive, inductive process whereby you then generate new hypotheses that you're then looking for, where you're then looking for evidence for the new hypotheses and so forth. And it's a kind of like, so I think that they're using this term, and maybe it's kind of cute, and maybe we shouldn't all take it up, but it is, I think, that thing that you're describing.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. It's a fun word.
Yeah. I mean, what else does this imply to you guys? And I'm sorry, Kim, I'm not following the chat window. And if there are things that are coming through in chat, let me know if there's something important to add from the chat.
A wide range of theories, plus you generate theory.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing for me that I took away is that we don't have to stay within our disciplinary boundaries, that we give ourselves intellectual freedom and read outside of our field.
Love that.
It seems to me that we become great liberal arts, humanist, social scientists, because we, to bring all the knowledge possible to the phenomena that we read and read and read, basically, and get as aware as we can of the kind of multidisciplinary theoretical perspectives on the phenomena of interest that may be pertinent to the task at hand. So I am promiscuous in my application of theory, consciously. And it drives me crazy when I see things that are like, we applied the health belief model to blah, blah, blah. Because, how is that adding to, why are you doing qualitative work necessarily?
So then I guess I wonder what does it mean for how you begin the design of a qualitative research study? I mean, I guess there's a review committee, right, and a proposal, and maybe we can decide, or maybe that is exactly what we talk about. But
I mean, I think I'm going to get into it more when I talk about examples. We go to 11, right?
Yes, we do.
I'll give a concrete example in a little while, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The second question or statement they have, we may see through gendered and racialized eyes, but we also see through the theoretical lenses of the training we went through, the theories we read, the political allegiances we may have fostered. Is this true? And if so, does it strengthen or weaken our methodological work?
I mean, I think it strengthens it. But we have to acknowledge that there is this level of diversity in our positionality, and we don't go as far as I think Timmerman would like us to in explaining our positions. We sort of end with race, gender, class, and theoretical perspective, and don't talk extensively about what else informs how we think and see the world.
I mean, and even just to double back to what you were talking about earlier, Carol, around, I mean, the perception, I mean, this are and epistemology are become merged, and that becomes really complicated, and yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this statement, they're just trying to make sure that we don't get too literal and circumscribed in our thinking about positionality, and also in terms of thinking about the collaborators in the research process. We are all more than our kind of identities. And we also have to make transparent and think about the kind of ethics of our ethical stance with the work as well. And then they say, if we wish to foster theory construction, we must be neither theoretical atheists nor avowed monotheists, but informed theoretical agnostics. So what does this mean? And does it kind of contradict the above statement or not?
I just loved it when I read that, and it reminds me of what Jason said in the chat. We can kidnap or abduct theories from other disciplines.
I just want to randomly say this is one of the most stimulating seminars I've been to in ages, and I'm really starved for these kinds of conversations. So just thank you, everybody.
Awesome. I mean, me too. I've been thirsty for this kind of conversation, obviously, so I was happy to do it. Okay. I'm going to just talk about a couple of preconditions, they say, for abductive reasoning. They say that socially cultivated and cultivatable ways of seeing become the preconditions for abductive reasoning. And the literature on positionality is called for diverse forms of epistemological accountability. We're critically interrogating the researcher's biography, intentions, and procedural principles, offer a clarification of the position from which knowledge has been culled. And Denzin and Lincoln also say, research is an interactive process shaped by one's personal history, biography, gender, social class, race, and ethnicity, and those are the people in the setting. And finally, having and applying a broad knowledge base of social and behavioral theory. In-depth knowledge of multiple theorizations is thus necessary, both to find out what's missing or anomalous in an area of study and to stimulate insights about innovative or original theoretical contributions. Rather than engaging with the scholarly literature at the end of the research project, as inductivist approaches have often advised, abduction assumes extensive familiarity with existing theories at the outset and throughout every research step. Knowing the theory means, in essence, knowing the theories.
Carol, I just wondered about, I know that for me, I wasn't ever trained firmly in one direction or the other. It was always an open question that I've discussed with, with colleagues, whether you go in informed, how much do you know about the thing that you're planning to study? But are other people firmly on one side or the other, going in with, as a blank slate, or trying to be as informed as possible, or somewhere in the middle, or?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Julia. I was trained to be very both inductive and deductive. And I think somebody else said in the chat that, you know, in public health, we're often told to kind of like shy away from using the term grounded theory because there's, you know, so many, you know, theories out there that we're learning, and also the data that's informing the questions that we're asking and how we're analyzing the data. So yeah, I think from what I've been saying is I'm an inductive and deductive methodologist.
I think also what they highlight here is, you know, we don't come in as blank slates. You know, we are people in the world and we've already been exposed to theory. You can't perhaps ever come in and leave that. And I just appreciate that there's a discussion here about having, you know, depth, but also breadth in theory, and using that to help us, you know, as opposed to seeing it as a hindrance or something that has to be left behind.
Absolutely.
I'll just give a grounded example. So I've worked with Julia. She and I cross paths on tobacco research. I'm an HIV researcher. I don't know anything about tobacco. And so in order for me to become, you know, deeply familiar with what is happening in that industry, you know, it would require a lot of time and effort that I'm not willing to put in. And so there's just this tension, the advantage I bring because I'm naive to what is known. But then there's the limitation of, well, I'm not sure if what I'm seeing as something surprising in the data, which Timmermans and Tavory want us to pay attention to surprise. Is it surprising to everyone or just me because I don't know it's already in the literature? So it's really about that kind of knowledge, not you know, our positionality in the world.
I mean, I'm just going to come back to sort of our positionality as qualitative researchers in kind of a health and medically oriented field. You know, I mean, in my career, I mean, I've had to jump onto projects that I had no idea what the phenomena really were, and I mean, but other people did, and you know, so it was a more collaborative in that sense of trying to construct, you know, what they think might be interesting versus what I saw the data guiding. And sometimes those things were at odds, and sometimes there was significant friction because they were at odds, where I felt like the data were saying one thing and the ideologies of the people that I was working with, the PIs, typically clinicians, clinician researchers, really felt like they wanted it to go in a different direction. You know, so, you know, I mean, and I think that had I been more knowledgeable about the field, then I would have had more grounding to say something and push back a little bit more forcefully than I was able to as somebody that was not as knowledgeable. So, I mean, here again, the positionality part is, you know, I'm positioned in a way that sort of prevents theory building, you know, because there's other goals at hand for the data and the projects. So
You raised such a great point, Chris. And I think it not only does that come up when you're kind of entering a new field, but it also comes up when you're like a junior researcher and there are power dynamics at play. And, you know, I've just finished a project where I was working for a NGO and they had a very clear idea of what they wanted the data to say, and the data was not saying that. And so, and I tried to push back, but, you know, they were very like insistent that we had to say this for the data, and it just felt so wrong. Yeah, so I think it does come up when you have these other political economic driving forces that you're like, they needed funding, and you know,
that's like a whole other session, like how to strategize. Basically, you need allies who are more senior, who can kind of back you up.
I add, just to build on what Anna and Chris said, you know, I wonder if we can think about this more expansively as well. When we think about working in these teams and with clinicians who may have different views than us, or funders or collaborators who have a different sort of agenda or expectation, you know, that like, you know, if we think more expansively about like, what is theory, like the ways in which these clinicians are making sense of their environment, you know, I think listening to them, because if they're surprised by something that our data collection is yielding, like that is an important opportunity also. You know, if you think about that as another sort of way of considering what is a surprising theoretical finding, I think that's generative too, and probably gives us more space to intervene and to provide theoretical insights that are relevant not only to building like social science theory, but also to speaking to and developing concepts and theories for, applied work.
Thank you. Can I move on to talking really briefly? I mean, we only have like 3 more or 4 more minutes. I'll just say that this article that I wrote, Redemption of the Spoiled Identity, the Role of HIV Positive Individuals in HIV Care Cascade Interventions, is, I think in my mind, it was like my of all the years of work, it was like the first time that I really gave myself the intellectual freedom to be really creative with theory construction. And this was like analyzing a huge amount of data from 2 different, clinical trial studies, like, hundreds of people, like many years of work. And like these data, I set about kind of operating from a little bit of a deductive framework to kind of, try to characterize mechanisms of intervention action. And I did see surprising findings in the data that led me to new theoretical insights that were then informed by prior theory. And here, like for this, it was about how test and treat interventions, which were successful in the context of the search trial, were successful in part because of what was happening among HIV positive people who were in huge numbers getting tested and getting into care and treatment, who were not conceived of as intervention actors in these interventions, like the providers, the healthcare providers, the study team members, the community mobilizers were the actors, not the HIV positive people themselves. And this, I drew on this literature on therapeutic citizenship, which was, I really love the work of Wenken Yugen and this anthropological tradition talking about therapeutic citizenship, which cuts both ways, imposing and a kind of moral economy on people living with HIV/AIDS to be kind of citizens, to be good citizens in HIV care and treatment, and successful, adherence of ART medications and so forth. And at the same time, gives people a space in which to become fully re-engaged in society after experiencing stigma. And I also drew on this for this because all of that literature in the anthropology, in anthropology, which I'm not an anthropologist, but I have read a lot of anthropology, to me was really enriched by thinking about the work of Hannah Arendt and the human condition and her political philosophy, which was, I just found that it kind of helped the story to resonate to me, to frame things both in terms of that literature on therapeutic citizenship, but also this work of Hannah Arendt and her analysis of like ancient Greece and her drawing on, her contemporary philosophy, and she was a student of Heidegger and so forth, but about how the self is revealed in the public sphere through actions and words observed by others. And there was a way in which, in the narratives of people living with HIV, people talked about a transformation from being invisible to becoming visible again, from being non-persons to becoming persons again. So somehow the process of taking ART and getting and engaging in a very public process of getting others into care and treatment brought about a redemption of their kind of spoiled identity as a stigmatized person with AIDS to becoming someone who was fully a person in the eyes of other people in their communities. So I just felt like HIV positive people needed credit. They needed a lot more credit than they were getting for the successes of test and treat. And so that was what that article was about to me. So as an example, and then the other one is like, so I just have become more confident in asserting theory generation as the part of this process. And I encourage all of us to do that, because that is in fact what we're doing. And I think we need to just be much more forthright about it. And the second paper is really about adding kind of new theory to conceptualization of stigma, which I hadn't seen before, kind of conceptualizations. There's a lot of theoretical work on where stigma comes from, how it reinforces power inequalities, how it impacts people's HIV outcomes, but there wasn't a theory on how does HIV stigma decline. So I propose these kind of pathways through which HIV stigma can decline. And for that, I also am drawing on multiple theories, behavioral and social theories. So thank you in advance for reading those.
Well, excellent, excellent. Carol, we need you to come back, because I think we've all had such a good time talking to you, and you've really facilitated, I think, such a meaningful conversation that many of us just we're isolated and we don't get to talk about, struggle with these issues that are so important to us and our intellectual identities. So I know it's after 11, so those of you who have to leave, thank you for coming. There's so much in the chat, Carol. People are absolutely loving you, this, so rich and
Oh,
useful.
thanks.
You're generous and articulating. Megan, of course, she loves you. Please have Carol back to lead us.
I want to hear Megan. I want to hear about your recent work, Megan.
Yeah, we can have Megan and Carol talk to each other, and we can.
Great. So Kim, can we save the chat before we close out or anything? Is there any way to do that?
Because we're recording, we'll have the chat, the public chat downloads, and I can forward that to you. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much. This has been really fun.
Oh, it's been wonderful, Carol. Thank you. And I'm imagining we didn't get through all of your slides.
No, you did.
Oh, you did.
There weren't any more, actually. I was just going to tell stories. I was going to talk more about the articles, but it was, yeah.
Okay.
We got through all of them.
Well, actually, what you were able to say about both of these, really helpful for me. I've heard you present on the redemption of the spoiled identity, but that backstory you just told is, when do you get to tell that, right?
Yeah.
So that was fun for me. And I love the pathways for reduction of HIV-related stigma. I think it is such an important contribution. And it's so interesting because I don't do work in sub-Saharan Africa. I only do work in the US. And the possibility for these kinds of pathways to open are not there. It's not possible because of the diffusion of people who are living with HIV. And it's just really interesting to see what's possible in that setting, but not here.
All right. Well, thank you all.